Welcome to the Stage Analysis Members Weekend video. It's Sunday the 11th of September 2022. I'm going to start tonight's video by going through a number of stocks either in stage one, developing stage one bases, or breaking out in stage two with more than the 2 times average weekly volume this week, before getting into the major indexes, the industry groups, relative strength rankings, industry group bell curve, what else are we going to go through? Market breadth, in order to determine the weight of evidence, and then get into some of the watch list stocks and particularly some of the themes that are going on at the moment. There's been a lot of watch list stocks over the last week, with so many stocks starting to turn back up again within obviously developing stage one bases. So it's more about the actual group themes and where the areas of strength are developing, and trying to focus in on some of the better ones of those. Obviously you can get a lot of stocks. A few people have asked me about this, about how you can start to cull down the lists a bit and focus in more on it. As part of Stan Weinstein's method is obviously looking through the group themes. It's a really important part of it. So one way you can obviously develop the watch lists, especially when you start to get a proliferation of stage one bases and there's lots of stocks showing up and you don't know what to track, is that you can start to do some peer analysis and start to get a bit more into the details of each group, and try and find the 3 to 5 leading stocks from each of the groups that are popping up in the watch lists. So there's not really that many actual groups at the moment. Is that there's a lot of stocks, but there's not so much in the way of actual groups that are actually breaking out, or although many are moving into stage one, but there's not a huge amount compared to the 104 industry groups that there are, or the 200 IBD industry groups, depending on what you use. So you can obviously start to break those down into smaller lists, and then focus in on the leading stocks of those. So I'll cover that a little bit later in the watch list as well. Okay, let's get on with the first part of the video. So SBUX, I highlighted earlier in the week, I think on the Twitter feed and in the watch list posts. So this is the weekly chart. You can see it's gone through all of the stages over the last few years since 2020. Is it the shakeout, the stage 4 break in early 2020, with the rest of the market in quick recovery move, came back up into stage 1, then started to move back out into stage 2 in what we got there, August 2020, before a strong stage 2 advance, and topped out, failed stage 4 breakdown attempt, and then finally made a more convincing break into stage 4. So now currently we're potentially moving into stage 1 at the moment. You can see I've marked a tentative head and shoulders pattern here. Obviously this could fail. Many inverse head and shoulders patterns do, but the point at the moment is that there's a lot of these. So it's just showing the developing price action, the fact that we've got this sharp move up, this change of behavior, as we call it, and then we've had a shorter pullback, which has formed a higher low, and it's potentially starting to show signs of this inverse head and shoulders pattern. But whether this actually follows through and we break out into stage 2, obviously still an unknown at the moment. Multiple stocks have already done that in the last few weeks or so, and some on the push this week, with the market moving up in the final 3 days of the week. So a strong week for SBUX here. Obviously it's a bit of a large cap stock, so 6.93% move for it is quite a large bar. You can see this candle was the biggest candle it's had for a little while now. It had a one off the low that was similar, and it had this big reversal type bar here, but compared to the rest of the price action in 2022, this is potentially the second or third biggest bar that it's had here. So showing some strength. The volume was reasonable, a little bit above average potentially, and you can see the relative strength versus the S&P 500 is just breaking above the zero line, which is just attempting to flatten out now. So relative strength wise, it's moving in line with the S&P 500, slightly starting to outperform. So in order to move out into stage 2, we'd want to see a strong break above. You want to see more than 2 times the average volume if it does, and then for it to hold if it does start to pull back again into the range in the following weeks. So you don't want it to drop back down into the range. You want to see that tennis ball type action, then that potentially gives you that secondary entry point in the method, and for it to continue up and out into a potential stage 2 uptrend. We'll see, as I said, it could start to fall back down in here and could still stay within stage one. Even if it breaks back down below and starts to form a broader range here, it could continue to build a stage one base for a while here, or potentially fall back off into stage four. But at the moment, it's close to the top of the developing stage one range. So we're looking for a potential stage two breakout attempt in this. Wolf is another one that I highlighted earlier in the week and has been on the watch list multiple times in the last few months. Had this big move. If we could drop down to the daily here, you can see it was an earnings gap up move on this day here. Had a big jump, and then prices developed around this earnings gap bar really well. You can see most of the price action actually developed above the bar and has pulled back in a few times, but it hasn't touched the low. It's had a few little moves back into it and then popped up again this week. Not the strongest end to the week there, obviously, with the moves we were seeing elsewhere. So not showing a lot of conviction at the moment. So still potentially building a little bit of a range at the moment and consolidating in this flag pattern, but it has had a very strong move over the last few months here. You can see 100% move, and the pullback has only been around 15%. So high type flag-ish. It's not quite technically a high type flag. I think it needs to be more than 100% for that, but close enough. It's developing as that. As I said, could still pull back in, but at the moment the price action is holding above this 200-day moving average, the 21-day in there. If we get the ATR bands, you can see it's hovering above the 1 ATR level as well. So if it can continue to hold above and develop out a little bit, then potentially a little bit of VCP type action maybe, and then up and out. So with a stage two continuation, it's showing potentially one of the strongest. I think this is potentially this and AEHR in the semiconductors group at the moment in terms of relative strength. I think Wolf is just tipping it at the moment, but both in early stage two at the moment. You can see during the pullback here that the volume has been diminishing, although it has still remained fairly high. It hasn't tailed off dramatically, but since this earnings gap bar, it has pulled back while this has been consolidating. So that is kind of price action we want to see. Another one this week that looks interesting going into the end of the week, it's come up in the watch list, ASO. So this one had a big reversal week off of the stage two breakout level, broke out into stage two. What we got there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks ago. So potentially, and then it had a backup initially, came back into the range, but managed to hold and then managed to push back up and out again, but it's pulled back in with the recent weakness. You can see volume has been lower on the pullback move there, and then this week the volume has expanded again. So good move in the volume there. You can see relative strength is making new highs ahead of the price action. See the previous high up here was a lower high on the relative strength, so showing good characteristics. You've got a double bottom pattern here on a larger scale through the early part of 2022 and then into the May low with a massive spring reversal there before showing a sign of strength up and out of the range here. So this one looks in good shape to potentially move higher, potentially in stage two. So if it does continue up, we want to see it hold above the top of the range that it's formed at the moment and start to get through the top here. So we drop down onto a daily quickly here. You can see at the moment potentially short-term resistance area here, a little bit potential for a double top. It's had a strong move this week, this gap up, so good need to tighten up a bit, come back in again, look for some VCP type action if it does, or just tennis ball action and up and out. So come back to the weekly, you can see, as I said, volume's been more than 2 times the weekly, and we've got a stage analysis technical attribute score of 9 at the moment out of 10. So it's in good technical shape as well in the early part of stage 2. So definitely one to keep an eye on there. DBI, another interesting one this week. Had this massive range where the stage 3 ranges gradually over time developed and then formed back into stage 1 and broke back out into stage 2. You do see this quite a lot. Obviously everybody expects, if they've read the book, that the stages go through the 4 stages and it goes up and down and comes all the way back down again, but that's not always the case. A lot of times corrections can happen through time, so you'll get a decent stage 2 run, then it'll come up, you might have a quick shakeout, and then it'll start to form a lower range and then potentially move back off into stage 2 again. So you have a we've got a failed stage 4 breakdown attempt, or this one, it did move into stage 4 for a little while. So you can see here, back in 2021, it did have an early failed breakdown attempt, a little bit of spring type action, and moved back into the range. Started to develop a broader stage 3 base structure here, had a little bit of up thrust action, and then moved down again, and finally broke down maybe into stage 4 around this kind of area here, starting to break down through this trend line resistance here. So a little bit of a tentative break into stage 4 there. You can see the declining 30-week moving average at the time. So some might still consider that late stage 3B there, as it hadn't broken this lower level, but you can see it broken this level here again for a second time. So I would mark that potentially as the new stage 4 breakdown area. But as you can see, it didn't make a lot of progress. If we drop down onto the daily here, we should be able to see that it didn't make a huge amount of progress there. Like, zoom out a little bit to 11 months, see that a little bit better. So came down but quickly reversed back up again. So we drop back up to our weekly here. You can see this turn as it started to move back through the 30-week moving average again. Then the 30-week moving average started to turn up. You can see the 10-week started to move back above that. So we started to move back into a stage 1, even though it hadn't ever really had a massive breakdown into stage 4. So this is one area that people can get confused with stage analysis, as they don't believe that a stock can move from when it's in stage 3 can then move back out into stage 2 again. But you can see where you have failed moves, failed attempts that just obviously end up as liquidity areas for the larger operators, then turns it back up again. So you can move from a distributional pattern into an accumulation pattern and then start to move back out again. So stage 3 can morph into stage 1 over time. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at those patterns, is it doesn't necessarily, just because it's in stage 3, mean it's gonna break down into stage 4. So this, as I said, broke out into stage 2 again around, we got there 5 weeks ago now. So had a decent reversal week this week, 6.69%. Not much in the way of volume. Our stage analysis technical attribute score is at a 7 at the moment out of 10. So showing it's in a score of 7 or above tends to be when a stock is in stage 2. You'll get a stage 2 breakout will happen when the score's on around a 9 or a 10. But generally, when you're trending in stage 2 or pulling back within stage 2, you'll be on the lower end of that scale. So maybe a 7 or an 8 as it's moving higher, as you've got rising moving averages, and obviously all the other technical attributes, the relative strength, the volume are in line and moving higher. So at the moment, it's in good technical shape. The size of this base structure gives it obviously a lot of cause in order to move higher. So you can see we've got a good year or so in terms of base structure there. So this could push out up and high into a further stage 2 advance here. So looking at let's get to the daily scale on this. You can see this has pulled back into that range. Good rebound on Thursday and Friday. Not much in the way of volume though. So just popping out. If we look at it on the 2-hour time frame here, you can see this is a good example of trying to enter on the backup. If you're using you can use a lower time frame in order to try and get in on the backup entry point. So by using stage analysis on a lower time frame, you can, instead of just guessing the low or trying to get in at the original breakout level, as it can just, if you go back to the weekly here, a lot of the times the pullback moves here can turn into an up thrust. So if you're trying to enter at the breakout level here and you just trying to buy at this point here, the price action could just fall straight over and continue off back down again, as this could form an up thrust. But if you start to see it hold, if you drop down to lower time frames, the 2 hour, the 1 hour, etc., I prefer the 2 hour, you can use stage analysis on a lower time frame here. So you can see that it's moved down into stage 4, started to potentially develop into stage 1, and at the moment it's attempted to move up but hasn't quite moving up and out yet into stage 2, but it's attempting to reverse back up. Obviously very tentative at the moment. You want to use the same quality qualifiers that you use on the weekly. So you want to see big bars like this on the breakout. So if this does break up into stage 2, you'll see some strong relative volume come in. Doesn't necessarily have to have it, but it's a good sign that there's obviously interest in the stock if it does get it. So you could see at the moment this is testing the top of the stage 1 range on the intraday here. But so potentially in the backup entry zone, but not quite there yet. It needs to follow through. But as we can see with this, again, relative strength outperforming above the zero line here, which is the 52-week relative strength moving average of the stock versus the S&P 500. You can see that's making higher highs again. So in decent shape. DGII, another